Thanks to those of you who are joining us on Zoom. If you'll just give us a moment for everyone to load into the Zoom room, we will get started momentarily. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. My name is Ken Levinson, and I am the Executive Director of WITA, and we are delighted to welcome you here today. I believe today is the 75th webinar panel we've hosted since March of 2020, and we're planning a robust schedule of events in the coming weeks and months before we transition, hopefully, to having some in-person events later in 2021. But not to worry, even when we begin having these in-person events, we'll continue to have a robust pipeline of online programming to service our national and international audience. On the scheduling front, we'll be relaunching our Trade and Climate series in the weeks to come, and today's event kicks off our series of events looking at worker-centric and inclusive trade. Today's event, in fact, is the first in a two-part mini-series on trade and gender. We're hosting the second event in the series next Friday, March 26th, to look at meaningful actions to address barriers to trade in women, barriers to trade for women in the world. Information on that event can be found at www.wita.org and in the programming email sent a little while ago. We also plan to partner with Women in International Trade on an event on COVID and medical supply chains on April 1st, to discuss trade with Europe on April 12th, and do a deep dive on CAFTA trade and immigration on April 14th. So a lot in the pipeline. Watch your inbox for more information on these events. If you've been on any one of our 74 other webinars, you know that one of our favorite traditions is to call out the names of some of those you're in community with at today's event, even if you can't see them on your screen. So welcome today to Emily Fisher at the U.S. Department of State, Sadie Marks at the U.S. Grains Council, Frank Simolis with Squire Patton Boggs, and Ambassador John Weeks at Bennett Jones LLP. It's a real pleasure to welcome them and all of you. We are delighted to bring you all together and bring this great mix of experts from around the world for discussion here at WITA. First, a special welcome to two veterans of the WITA stage, Laura Lane, Chief of Corporate Affairs at UPS, and Pamela Koch Hamilton, Executive Director of the International Trade Center. Laura has been a dear friend of mine since we met in Geneva 25 years ago, Laura, and I'm thrilled she's agreed to moderate this discussion, coming to us today from Atlanta. And welcome back to WITA to Pamela, who many of you knew from her time in Washington at the Embassy of Jamaica and is now based in Geneva. We're also delighted to welcome to the WITA webinar stage three new friends. Heather Kipnis of the World Bank, coming to us today from Florida. Sara Wilshaw, Canada's Chief Trade Commissioner, coming to us from Ottawa. And Rodrigo Yáñez, the Vice Minister of Trade of Chile, coming to us from Santiago. Welcome to the WITA stage, Heather, Sara, and Rodrigo. If you're watching this on Zoom, you should have received the biographies of all our panelists in an email a little while ago, so we won't go into greater detail here. And if you're watching on Zoom, you can ask questions using the Q&A tab. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can later in the event. With that, I'll turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Ken, for that really great introduction, and hello to everyone. I have to tell you, I am so thrilled to be part of this conversation during Women's History Month with the Washington International Trade Association, or what we affectionately call WITA. And for me, it isn't about Women's History Month, it's about Women's Economic Empowerment Month. And so, you know, Ken shared my long title. I'm Chief Corporate Affairs, Communications, and Sustainability Officer at UPS, but I really consider myself UPS's Purpose Officer. Our purpose is to move our world forward by delivering what matters. And for us, delivering what matters means empowering and enabling everyone to be able to benefit from trade. And a good place to start is with women. And today, you know, we've got this amazing panel, and it's going to be a good discussion about how governments and international institutions can work together to really ensure that the benefits of trade are shared equally in all of our societies. The World Trade Organization launched an informal working group on women in trade, and the World Bank and the WTO pushed a report last year on the topic, and we've got the OECD set to release further recommendations in May. And Rodrigo and I, we worked on trying to advance initiatives focused on women in trade through APEC. Well, we've gone through a pandemic now, and our Vice President of the United States of America, Kamala Harris, did this amazing op-ed raising the alarm bells about what it's going to take to foster global economic recovery, and said that the biggest impact we've seen has been on women. So let's start the recovery by starting with women. Because if you invest in a woman, you're investing in a family, you're investing in communities, and you're investing in countries. And lo and behold, you're starting to move the world forward. So I really look forward to hearing a lot of the ideas that the panelists have around concrete proposals that countries and the WTO can take to make trade policy more equitable and to help eliminate gender discrimination. We've had years of studies. The time is over to have more studies. And I know trade can't solve every problem, but we can make sure that the rules create the right incentives to ensure everyone enjoys the benefits of trade agreements. And so we've got a lot of work to go in order to achieve full gender equality. I mean, you look at the statistics globally, women have just 75% of the legal rights that men are given, and only 40% of countries have laws that restrict the discrimination against women in the workforce and in trade. And so we have an opportunity now to fix that. So I'd love to turn to this amazing panel to talk about the concrete steps that we can take to lift women up, to lift families up, to lift communities, countries, and the world up, because it's time that we start delivering some hope, and women are going to be a big source of that. So I thought I'd start with the ITC director, Pamela, and have you kick us off. And so I guess the first question that I wanted to ask is, what do you think is necessary to really create a more inclusive trading system that really facilitates women's employment and economic empowerment?
Thanks a lot, Laura. I really appreciate it, and I love your energy. I want to say good morning and thanks to WITA for putting together this webinar, and congratulations on your 75th webinar in 1 year. I think the first thing is a key ingredient is collaboration. It's not good enough that only a few actors are working in silos on good initiatives. Companies, parliamentarians, policymakers, schools, international institutions, funders, all the actors related to international trade need to get on the same page and move in a coordinated and more impactful way. We need to break down the silos and collaborate on a common cause. And that's a big part of the success of bringing gender into the House of International Trade. Of course, here I'm referring to the 2017 WTO Declaration on Trade and Gender and the ensuing WTO Informal Working Group on Trade and Gender, which you just referred to. Thanks to these kinds of collaborative efforts, we now have policymakers and agenda setters within the WTO increasingly sharing best practices on supporting women in trade, voluntarily reporting on gender during WTO trade policy reviews, collecting gender disaggregated data, and applying a gender lens in trade policy. We also, however, need to establish common grounds of evidence and knowledge. As Maya Angelou said, I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. And the more we understand about the challenges women in international trade face, is the better we can support them in overcoming these barriers. So through the ITC She Trades initiative to connect 3 million to market by 2020, we can all do the song now, ITC and its partners have been working to establish common ground on what those challenges are. For example, we regularly conduct surveys and studies on challenges facing women in international trade. Notable examples of these include ITC's in-depth analytical 2019 study, Europe to the World. And this tracks the challenges of women-led businesses in Europe and the 2020 Global COVID-19 Business Impact Survey. Both of these, by the way, highlight access to finance and the unacceptable digital divide as areas in which women need significant support. In the same vein, ITC also worked alongside ISO and national standard setting bodies to adopt and launch just last week a universally harmonized definition on women entrepreneurship. This ISO agreed definition now provides an incredibly important and sound basis on which to craft and operationalize policies and programs for women in trade. And also with the support from the UK government, the ITC has worked with a range of national statistics offices and government ministries, both of developed and developing countries, to develop an online interactive tool which is called She Trades Outlook. And this helps governments understand where they stood in supporting women in trade through policies. From Canada to Australia, Malaysia to Nigeria, more than 30 countries have rolled out She Trades Outlook and are taking concrete measures to ensure their policies are gender responsive. I want to encourage more countries to join the global movement and roll out this tool, because there's no Build Back Better in the recovery without gender equality. Finally, we can't talk about how to gain a greater share of global trade for women without talking about procurement and buying from women. Through the ITC She Trades initiative, together with our private sector and government partners, we give buyers visibility to women-owned businesses through the She Trades online and mobile platform. We also build up the skills and capacity of women entrepreneurs on the use of e-commerce platforms, business planning, product branding and marketing, as well as preparing them to become more investment ready through impact investment platforms like the Care She Trades Fund. With respect to procurement, many countries, including the United States, recognize public procurement as a key opportunity to both support women's participation in the economy and ensure COVID-19 recovery. It's also happening in the global south, in countries like Chile and Nigeria, just to name a few. Similarly, corporates such as UPS, who've been such an incredible partner of the ITC She Trades, have gone above and beyond to create special programs that provide training to women in trade and help integrate them into the global supply chain. So with these few illustrations, I hope that I've given you a clear indication of the power of partnerships towards the advancement of gender equality in international trade. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Pamela. And I was going to say, I mean, a lot of people ask, why does UPS do it? And they think, oh, it's because it's the right thing to do. Heck, it's good business to be partnering and empowering women. And so, we love teaming up with you guys, because we found that when we give women the tools and kind of that expertise and the knowledge, they don't need too much to get going. We just got to eliminate the barriers and obstacles that are in their way. And I'd love to turn to Sara, because you know what? Canada doesn't just talk the talk. You guys walk the walk. I mean, you guys have been trailblazers in terms of really taking concrete action steps to really address gender equity and looked at a lot of your policies and initiatives with that gender lens. And you know what? You gave permission for many of us to start thinking that way. I'd love to just get your perspective on the amazing work that Canada's done, and what's necessary to make this more of an inclusive trading system.
Well, thanks so much for that, Laura. Absolutely, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Bonjour à tous et toutes, as we say here in Canada, of course. This is really exciting. It's great to see all these conversations taking place, and you're seeing a sort of an explosion of these conversations now about inclusion and equity and empowerment and the really core values underpinning Canada's public policy. And we've been trying to champion a lot of those conversations across international fora as well as at home. And that includes also our approach to trade, our commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, which of course aim to leave no one behind. I personally think we should go a little farther than that and start talking about who we put in front. But that's maybe subject of more discussion. We really see it as a cross-cutting, commitment. It's expressed in our defense of human rights, our feminist foreign policy, our feminist international assistance policy, and it's deeply integrated into our trade policy and our promotion activities. So I'm really happy to talk about what we're doing here concretely. And in my role as Canada's Chief Trade Commissioner, my focus is really on helping Canadian companies to succeed internationally. So we work closely with businesses at every step and stage and across every sector. So nice to hear that there's a pretty wide participation in today's event. So that's great. We were able to get messages to a lot of folks. But you know, what we really know is that not everyone's benefited equally from the opportunities that are out there. And this is particularly true for women entrepreneurs. It's been exacerbated by the pandemic, which has disproportionately affected women and vulnerable groups. And I know we'll talk about that too. And it's important that our efforts contribute to the ability of all members of society to take advantage of the opportunities. So we are really looking also at underrepresented groups too. But when we talk about, you know, our encouragement and facilitation, we try to, you know, zero in on a lot of these groups, including women-led, women-owned businesses. We look at having a positive impact on growth, and it helps to reduce the inequalities that are there. So just a couple of facts and figures. We know in Canada that only 16% of Canadian small businesses are owned by women. Only 11% of those businesses export to the world stage. So that's huge untapped potential. We can definitely do better. And research shows that women-owned SMEs, you know, that export, the ones that export, they tend to earn more. They tend to pay more, employ more people, and they are more productive than firms that operate only domestically. We're an export-oriented economy. We're a very small market of 38 million people in a very privileged position next door to a very large market, and with a really strong relationship between the two. So this is a tremendous advantage to our folks, and we know that. But research shows us that, you know, we could add up to $150 billion to our economy by simply advancing women's economic empowerment and ensuring full inclusion of women in the economy on the world stage. And I'm sure Pamela would say the same. That's a potential for $12 trillion increase to the global economy if we really get women into the right place and you know, fully contributing. So if I can say just a word about my own organization and the Trade Commissioner Service of Canada, this is a team of 1,200 trade professionals in offices in 160 cities around the world. Okay, and we have a lot of dedicated programs that fall, we've been doing for a long time. They fall under Business Women and International Trade Initiative. That's been going since the 90s. It provides really tailored advice and guidance for women entrepreneurs. But we also run dedicated trade missions, trade accelerator programs just for women, and we try to offer a very concierge level service to our women-owned, women-led companies because there's a lot of unintended barriers along the way. So the other really important piece, just bringing it back up to the let's say at the federal family level here in Canada, and then we'll go to the international, we work with partners. Pamela mentioned this. So at our federal level, we have Business Development Canada, which has dedicated capital available. And we talked about the fact that, you know, capital is one of the challenges. We have Export Development Canada as well, and a lot of other government departments that we work with closely, including our provinces and territories as well. So there's a lot there, but no country can do it alone either. And that's why we work closely with our trading partners. And it's, you know, we've been pushing trade and gender chapters in our modernized FTAs. Of course, it's great to see Chile on the line here as well, because we did that first with them in 2017, with Israel in 2018, and with the EU through the Trade and Gender Recommendation, which was adopted in 2018. So, you know, all of that's really, really important. And because we're talking to folks in Washington, we have recently completed, gender impact assessment of the USMCA, which noted that the agreement includes a lot of innovative, gender responsive and inclusive provisions for SMEs, for labor and investment chapters. And it's, that's available on our website for those that are interested. But it's really, it is important to work with the partners, including the WTO. So that was mentioned, but we played, I think, a pretty key role there in helping to draft and advance the Buenos Aires Declaration on Trade and Women's Economic Empowerment. And now there are 120 WTO members supporting that. Of course, we welcome additional members, including the United States, to join us in endorsing it. And we're looking at supporting the launch of phase 2 of the declaration with the establishment in the WTO of an informal working group on women in trade. So, it really is about that. And I think we've got another exciting opportunity specifically with the US on our Canada-US partnership roadmap, which was recently signed by Prime Minister Trudeau and President Biden, where they outlined their commitment to promoting inclusive societies that respect diversity. So we're really looking forward to working with all our partners to build a more fair, equitable, and inclusive society. So I'll stop there for now, but lots to dig into in this subject for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Sara. And I was going to say, I kind of got a feeling that the United States is going to do more than endorse that declaration. I'm hoping that we're going to be part of a powerful group of countries that are going to lead the next steps for action, because I really think the time is now, to act. And I have to tell you that it was so exciting. Under Canada's leadership, you've been, methodically working with these trade agreements to codify that language in trade agreements, and it was so awesome to see it reflected in the USMCA. I think that was quite powerful on so many levels to have that be included in the trade agreement. But I want to turn to Rodrigo next. Ken and Rodrigo, amazing he for she guys. You guys are champions for women's economic empowerment. I could always count on you, Rodrigo, to be, advancing ideas and initiatives within the Chilean government, and we need more of that. And so kudos, for not only Chile's leadership, but the leadership that you personally have brought to this issue, because sometimes when you're the only woman in the room, it's nice to know you have an amazing ally in ministers and trade ministers like yourself. And I think that makes a difference, because that allyship is important, because that's how you start moving the needle. So I'd love to get your perspective from the Chilean viewpoint on how we make trade more inclusive. You guys have been leading a lot of cool initiatives, and I know we were partnering in APEC on some of those ideas, but what's your perspective on the question of how we make the trading system more inclusive?
Thank you, Laura. It's always a pleasure to see you. I would say also known as my partner in crime back in this when we led this APEC host year. I would like to thank and also say good morning to everyone today here. And for us, it's very important what we see here as part of I would say, and I take as a recognition, and you have mentioned to our ambitious agenda and forward-looking agenda when it comes to trade. Over the past few years, we have championed different initiatives around the idea of inclusive global trade, which I think now, as we talk about digital disruption and recovery, economic recovery, I think we have a tremendous opportunity when we think of women economic empowerment, in the context of economic recovery. And I think we all know the general answer to this question, and that is a more inclusive trading system is one that leaves no one behind. And we know the keywords also of what generally characterizes women-led SMEs. Fewer, smaller, younger, less well-financed, and also less productive. And it's no surprise that this is also precisely the case here in Chile. So I think when you touched on what we have done in the past, I think that reflects also something that for me it's very important, and the way we believe this must be driven. And that is trade policy at all levels, multilateral, plurilateral, bilateral, but with a very strong, and I stress this, I cannot stress it enough, a public-private partnership flavor. And we need to increasingly turn multi and plurilateralism in driving forces of changes in women inclusion. And in that sense, you mentioned APEC, and certainly this was a major milestone for the first time in 30 years in the forum. The topic of women empowerment was raised to a priority level, having as the main deliverable this so-called La Serena roadmap for women and inclusive growth, which has key 5 action areas precisely touching on women economic empowerment in sectors to capital markets, labor force participation, but also on something that Pamela mentioned, and that is data collection and analysis. We think that this public-private partnership needs also to be extremely well connected in this sense. And we have translated this into 4 specific targets that respond to these working or action areas. And in this regard, again, you mentioned the word collaboration of all member economies, the private sector engagement, stakeholder engagement. It's extremely important to achieve the endorsement, which is a collaborative deliverable, which it's pending to further enrichment, and we are very proud of it and convinced of the importance of keeping towards the active advance on each one of the areas and objectives that I mentioned. But also, as it was agreed, there is a plan of the roadmap that sets the way in which APEC member economies will also fulfill these concrete actions and targets established in it. And a second proof of it, and also a proof of how we wanted this to spark to other multilateral fora, is the Pacific Alliance, which you might know is comprised by Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. We led or chaired the forum on 2020. And one of our developments was also the establishment of a roadmap for the autonomy and economic empowerment of women in the Pacific Alliance. This is something that we wanted to happen, that the work that we did in APEC also capitalized in this other initiative, and that we create a virtuous, a circuit. And in that sense, we also, as the coordinator of the gender technical group of the PA, of the Pacific Alliance, were leading the formulation of this implementation plan for the PA roadmap, which will set the way in which the 4 countries of the bloc will be delivering concrete actions for the economy and economic empowerment of women towards 2030. So bottom line, I see that there is a major role for trade policy to advance in the aim of women economic empowerment. This is a shift from, thinking of it as gender neutral. And we must, I think, fully embrace it. And that is why I always recall the relevance of the private sector role in this. And Pamela and you, Laura, also have touched on it, and their full participation in this. And in this sense, I think, again, the way we have addressed this is with collaboration and a very strong public-private partnership flavor. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Rodrigo. And just such powerful advocacy and leadership that you all have brought to not only regional efforts, but plurilateral efforts. And I think we definitely need to build on those. I want to turn to Heather because, oh my gosh, I've had the opportunity through this pandemic. We've been doing a lot of deliveries, but we've been also trying to lift a lot of small and medium-sized businesses up. And some of these SMBs, that women-owned ones, they have these amazing ideas, but money makes it happen, right? And if you can't own property in your name, you can't open a bank account, you can't get a loan unless you have a male co-signer. It's really hard to feel empowered to take your ideas and make them a reality. And you guys have been doing amazing work at the IFC, and we've been great partners with you on that. I'd love to get your perspective too on just the ways we can make this trading system more inclusive, and make sure that we, in the, I know copyrighted, show them the money, show them how they can make things happen. So Heather, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Laura. And I have to echo, Pamela, your enthusiasm. If anyone was coming to this, you know, a little down with everything going on, you have picked us all up and energized us. So thank you so much. And congrats, Pamela, on the ISO definition. And Sara, Canada is a tremendous development partner to the IFC, and really delighted to connect with you here. I'll build on a lot of Rodrigo's comments around the private sector. For those that aren't familiar with IFC, I mean, we are the largest global development institution that is focused specifically on the private sector and emerging markets. We're in more than 100 countries, and last year we did about $22 billion in long-term financing. And critical to our work is making sure that we're leveraging our investment and advisory operations to our clients to address gender gaps and to help get more women to economically participate, whether it's as employees, as entrepreneurs, consumers, leaders, and even stakeholders in the community. And I think when the question around an inclusive trade system, there's really, you know, there's opportunities to highlight here. I mean, we know that trade opportunities can substantially reduce poverty, but it also trade increases specialization in terms of roles, in terms of investment in new business models and technologies. This is particularly important for women entrepreneurs, and this results in higher productivity and earnings potential. It also creates more and better job opportunities for women, and this is part of our World Bank Group Gender Strategy, which drives a lot of our work in gender. And it's interesting, I'm glad you brought up the topic of women SMEs, because we have actually leveraged the great research of ITC, and Sara alluded to this as well, is that when women entrepreneurs can export, they earn more, they can pay their employees more, and they're more productive than firms domestically. And I think we have a lot of evidence of the benefits for women from our clients on this topic. And I'll give it a quick example of our work in Kenya. And Kenya is really interesting because there is a set aside for procurement from women-owned businesses. And this set aside has been actually really interesting in how it's enabled private sector procurement. And we have our infrastructure teams are actually there right now providing local supplier development programs. And I think it's important to bring the stories of the women that we're trying to support in. And I wanted to share quickly, there's one woman named Lydia, and she is a nutritionist by background. And she started to see in Turkana, which is one of the most impoverished counties in Kenya, that there's opportunities in more male-dominated sectors like construction. And so she participated in our training programs and actually set up a construction business, and is now benefiting from that set aside, that policy that is targeted to procure more from women. And she's winning construction bids on road construction and also what's called water pans, and competing alongside male-owned firms. And I love this story because it illustrates the power of this private sector partnerships that can be put into place. And that said, despite these examples, I think the available trade data that we have is showing that women are not experiencing these benefits at the same rate as men. And there are several challenges that have been highlighted, and I'd like to just quickly go a little bit deeper into what we're seeing in them. But you know, these challenges they're entrenched obstacles that are what's disproportionately affecting women, whether it's access to finance, information, capacity building. And we're seeing that women are actually operating, and I'm sure others have seen this as well, are operating in less productive sectors. So, and they're participating in value chains with lower economic nodes. I mean, if you look at procurement, the data we have is that 2.2% of corporate suppliers are women, and less than 1% are suppliers to public organizations. But then when it comes to exporting, what the data shows, 40% of SMEs are women, but only 1 in 5 are exporting. So women are largely invisible right now in these value chains. And a huge impediment is around access to finance. And part of access to finance on this conversation is access to trade finance. And when we look at trade finance, the actual gap is about 1.5 trillion. That's a huge gap on the supply side to be able to enable entrepreneurs to export goods and services. And what we're trying to do at IFC around this is we actually have a dedicated facility to address this. And it became much more important during the pandemic because as we all know, supply chains have been completely disrupted. And so we have developed, it's a $2 billion facility that provides direct funding to banks in emerging markets to enable them to extend credit to businesses so they can have working capital to be able to pay their bills, to be able to pay their employees. And what's critical to this facility is partnerships. And my colleagues on the panel have highlighted these partnerships. And so our Banking on Women, it's through our Banking on Women global trade finance platform. And we've partnered with the Goldman Sachs Foundation. And through this partnership, the Goldman Sachs Foundation allows us to provide incentives to those banks that are actually committing financing to women-owned businesses. So it's one thing for a financial institution to say that they're going to do it. It's another thing to actually show it and say that they're doing it. And so this is one way that we are trying to address the access to finance gap. And I'd like to highlight just two more challenges that are so critical to this conversation. And one is around the limited delivery capacity of women entrepreneurs. And I say that because what we're seeing is there's a schism here in terms of the requirements that SMEs need to meet to be able to provide, to be able to bid on tenders and to be able to win those tenders. And we've conducted some research in Kenya. We actually are just completing it and it'll be launched in May, but it was with 600 SMEs, 60% of them are women. And what we found was that almost half of them stated that they needed training to not only identify and find these tenders, but they also needed training on how to understand them and how to respond to them. And then even more so, about 52% said that they have capacity constraints to be able to fill order sizes. But what I found really interesting, and this is aligned with this concept of partnerships, is that women SMEs particularly are seeking alliances. They want to collaborate with other SMEs to be able to aggregate their power in terms of capacity to deliver on these contracts. And so I think that's an area where we can encourage more on that and probably borrow from sectors like agriculture, which have created various different types of cooperatives and those aggregation schemes. So I think just to summarize, there's a lot of opportunities where we can be more gender inclusive in terms of how we look at trade systems, collaboration, echoing this, it's absolutely key. But I do want to also echo Pamela's point. There's a number of different initiatives. So I've highlighted challenges on the capacity building side. There's training programs to support that. There's issues on the access to finance side. There's also issues on the underlying social and cultural norms, particularly in the pandemic, where it's placed such a huge burden of care on women in the household that is limiting their ability to be productive. And there's initiatives there, but they are siloed. And I think looking across these and creating initiatives that's connecting all of these initiatives together, it's going to be really critical to have a comprehensive and effective approach. And I know the conversation will go on. I'm happy to share some of our other work in terms of what we're doing on procurement with companies.
Thanks, Heather. That was awesome. And I really appreciate all those insights. And I want to take the conversation and squarely focus it on trade. An image came into my mind about Director General Akongowela, when she accepted, her new role. She got on stage and she started dancing. And I thought it was so beautiful, to see that, that expression of joy. And it brought me to that quote about, that you don't need to wait for the storm to pass. You have to learn how to dance in the rain. And I think about how the pandemic is happening and it's affecting women so much. And we understand all the challenges out there. Lord, we've read all those studies. We know the declarations that say what we need to do. How do we get action going? What are the specific action steps we need to take with respect to trade? And I want to zero in really on the rules, because you know what? There's so many rules, and barriers and restrictions out there. I think about some of the tariff categories. You know, women's jeans get tariffed higher than men's jeans. You know, I know men's razors are better than women's razors, but it's always cheaper to buy the men's razor. Why is that? You know what I mean? I think about, you know, how sacks of coffee, you know, are commoditized and they're sold in these big bulk, you know, heavy weights, and it's heavier for women. Like, who made up those standards and those rules? How do we change those rules of trade and take those specific actions? And maybe we start with Sara, just because I think, you know, Canada has been looking at a lot of policies and regulations through that gender lens. How do we kickstart action and not more words? Because, you know what, I think women, you know, want to see more in terms of meaningful action being taken, so that they can tap into all these public-private partnerships and really be successful.
Well, thanks. It's, you know, it's a really important question. I think you're right. There's a lot of systemic pieces that need a lot more conversation. And there's, you know, what I think I'm really happy to say is that we're engaged deeply in those conversations. I think we're pushing them, and that's what we need to be doing right now. You know, and as you know, as the Vice Minister said, it's happening at all those levels. It's happening bilaterally, it's happening in the groups, it's happening at the multilateral level. So, and to zero in on, you know, what's really needed to actually help the women to succeed internationally. So, you know, that, I think that conversation needs to keep taking place at all of those different levels. And then, you know, looking to the practical and really like where, you know, the business, where the entrepreneurs live, this is what I hear every day. It's the same, you know, those same issues we talked about: access to capital, access to mentorship, access to networks, right? So just talking about the very, very practical pieces. And we have this opportunity as well. And you know, I think Pamela and Heather, we've all mentioned the digital piece as well, right? And what that can do for people. So, you know, when I think about the very practical level, that's where we're focusing in my organization. At a domestic level, we're focusing our energies and efforts on what have we learned through this process, right? Through this whole crazy pandemic period that we've been in. You know, there's a lot that's been learned, and it's really interesting to see how we can capture some of the best elements of this. So we were talking beforehand about virtual space. Here we are. The accessibility of the virtual space is incredible. It's really lowered the barrier to entry for a lot of women entrepreneurs. We talk about disproportionate demands in sort of childcare and household responsibilities and so on for women, but also at the entrepreneurial level. You know, the entrepreneurs will tell you they often don't have the time or the money to get on a plane and travel and explore a market and do that in real time. It's, you know, they're 24/7 on what they're trying to grow their business. So we're trying to take off some of that and I think explore some areas where we can help them to you know, find new opportunities without that kind of investment of time and capital, and do it in ways that are innovative using the technology we have available to us. So, for example, just, you know, my organization has a fund that it's called Can Export. It's a fund that we offer to SMEs to explore new markets. Typically, it was to sort of help them to go abroad. We pivoted in this digital space. We now allow them to use this funding to support things like getting onto e-commerce platforms, search engine optimization, developing a digital and IP strategy for going abroad. Like, these are practical and tangible pieces that actually help the women entrepreneurs on the ground to get out there and to explore in a more low risk way. So I think, from the sort of really high level to the really practical and tangible, we've got to be looking at every piece along the way.
Yeah, no, and those are such great points, because we've seen that through the pandemic, the power that digital connection can have for lifting up, or in certain respects, isolating back. Pamela and Heather, did you guys want to touch on that digital literacy part? And maybe Rodrigo as well, because I know Chile has also been doing a lot of work in that space, but maybe begin with Pamela, because it'd be interesting to get your take on some of the work that you all have been doing to really close that digital literacy gap, and what more can be done there.
Thanks so much, Laura. I mean, we were looking at a broader range, at not just the digital gap, but also the data gap. If this were easy, we wouldn't have 17 global challenges, and as a result, one of them is on gender. So it's no surprise that, for a lot of us, it's a problem. In the case of ITC and She Trades, some of the specific actions we've been taking, the first thing is we are building institutional capacity. And I refer to the issue raised about, procurement issues, and the fact that women have issues being able to understand it, to actually upscale, to actually answer the tender. So we partner with local and regional trade support institutions, and we establish She Trades hubs. And we've done that in the Middle East. We've done it in 8 existing country hubs in Kenya, Nigeria, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Chile. Trinidad and Tobago and Philippines were just launched actually during the pandemic to show how important it is. And there'll be a 9th country hub launched in South Africa in a few weeks. And then we have 6 more coming up in Uruguay, Rwanda, Egypt, Botswana, Saudi Arabia, and Vietnam. The second thing we do is the upskilling and facilitating of the market connections between women entrepreneurs and buyers. And we also do this by working with local trade support institutions. And I think that that's critical. The local institutions are important, right? We upskill in the branding, the packaging, the value addition, compliance and export. And we leverage your private sector expertise. For example, with UPS, Parsons School of Design, eBay, to train them on how to pitch to investors, to market to buyers, and how to develop investment business plans. And we also connect them to business investment opportunities. So I'm really interested to see how we could work with IFC to partner on doing this and accessing government procurement opportunities. And then, of course, we equip the policymakers with the data and tools to try to make economic empowerment more actionable. I think the whole issue of the digital divide has been laid bare by COVID. And so one of the things that we've been talking about as well is the issue of digital penetration. We can talk about e-commerce all we want. If there's no penetration at the level of the household where most women work out of, then it's going to be difficult for us to really, find the enable women to engage actively and actually upscale and actually engage in a democratic way in accessing markets. So I think that is going to be a critical tool. And to the extent that we can have public-private partnerships, as the Vice Minister said, I think that's an important issue that we need to address in terms of digital connectivity and digital access. So I'll just stop there because I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, thanks, Pamela. And I was going to say, for Heather and Rodrigo, we've got some great questions coming in too. And I don't know if you guys can see them rolling in. And I'm kind of excited about some of the questions being asked too, because it all comes down to the rules of the game. And one of the questions that came in was, I think it's sexy. She didn't think it was a sexy question to ask, but it's the World Customs Organization's segregated harmonized system where women and girls, products get tariffed at higher levels than thought of men's products. And then the other question was respect to, how do we get government procurement agreements to, really have carve-outs for women-led businesses? Is this something we could advance in the WTO? And so, you know, if you want to touch on the digital question, that'd be great. But I'd love to start the discussion going on to some of these WTO focused questions, because you know what? We need a solid foundation to stand on, and it's got to be one that eliminates the discrimination. It's good for the world if everybody is competing on the same, you know, rules and terms and conditions. So we don't need gender specific tariffs anymore. We need rules that are gender neutral and really uplift everyone. Because at the end of the day, it isn't about us versus them, men versus women. It's about we, the world. So how do we create trade rules that are about we, the world? So I'm going to go to Heather, and then Rodrigo. We'll jump back to you and wait for some additional questions.
Sure. Thanks, Laura. I mean, I'll just talk about the set-asides and these carve-outs and policies and how we're looking at those to see how they benefit the private sector. I do think there's an opportunity to, not to do more research, but I have to say it, is that it's really not yet clear the relationship between how those set-asides actually influence large global private sector companies. We have some anecdotal examples, and I shared one earlier on Kenya. But one of the ways that we're leveraging those types of policies is we have a program called Sourcing to Equal, where it's a commitment to connect 5,000 women entrepreneurs by 2023 to corporate procurement opportunities and in 4 markets. And one of our criteria in selecting the markets where we could be successful, because let's face it, this notion of supplier diversity and connecting women, whether it's international procurement opportunities or domestic, is not very well known in emerging markets. And so one of our criteria is to look at what countries have these set-aside policies in place. And one of the things that we're seeing is these policies also lend themselves to create an ecosystem that supports SMEs. So we're seeing the creation of certification bodies, whether it's a women-owned business or it's bodies that are helping these women entrepreneurs access information around tariffs. It's more about decreasing the information symmetries to be able to understand how to price their goods when they know that they have to take into account higher prices and higher fees, as you've just highlighted. But also, these policies are influencing, again, it's anecdotal what we're seeing in select markets, the development of business support organizations that can then be created to support building the capacity, whether it's sector specific, so that a women entrepreneur can actually get access to growth financing or working capital to deliver on a contract. And the technology piece is related to this, because what we're seeing is there are platforms out there that have a specific mandate. They're few, but they're growing. And I think G-Trade is a great example. We're also seeing some locally that we're partnering with, so that it's a technology platform, and you need to onboard more women to these. There is a capacity building element that to help them understand how to get online. Those that are more sophisticated, once they're online, and we've seen this with data on COVID, that women are able to stabilize their businesses and grow despite being in the pandemic. However, these platforms also, they need to leverage public-private partnerships that are helping to increase access to the internet. And there's been some interesting policies around how do you promote free access to the internet? Because in some countries like Nigeria, it is so cost prohibitive that no woman entrepreneur can spend that amount of money just to go, to access the platform. So those are some quick thoughts to the question, a really great one.
Thanks, Heather. Rodrigo, did you want to jump in on a lot of the different topics that that have been raised, and share some of the perspectives from the work that you all have been doing in a lot of these areas?
Well, Laura, I don't know well where to start, because there are so many things that needs to be addressed and what we're doing about it. But I think, well, with some of the questions, I think it's important, to be especially conscious about this being, the trade policy being not gender neutral. And that is something that needs to be pretty horizontal. And we have done this, for instance, when I talked about the Pacific Alliance, we launched a digital regional market. And specifically, there is a pillar in the regional digital market where we address precisely the relevance of training and also inclusion of women in a digital market. Throughout all of the 28 working groups of the PA, also we adopted a gender inclusion approach, so that everyone from market access to PI, IPR, to telecommunications or whatever, needs to also take into consideration a gender-based approach on what they do. And I think this will be a way to start, be more conscious about this, and that it could actually, like someone mentioned this, although we also are not that fully aware of having that problem here, but there could be issues that are, extremely difficult to identify if we do not apply, a very horizontal, a truly horizontal approach when thinking in gender on everything that we do. Having said so, also I think something specific that relates to APEC is the role of education and skills and in bridging the digital divide. And there we have a work which was very interesting with the OECD as part of our deliverables, and we found many different examples, and the phenomenon is not limited to APEC economy. Around 350 million fewer women online compared to men worldwide. And how we try to tackle this from the other side. I've talked about multi and plurilateralism, but also from the bilateral. Well, we have a gender mainstreaming through the inclusion of gender chapters in trade agreements to promote this kind of cooperation on trade and gender issues. In this sense, we are very proud to mention that since 2016, we have been at the forefront incorporating these issues in specific FTA chapters. And as you know, Chile has the strongest FTA network, or probably the strongest and largest FTA network in the world. So by including gender and trade provisions into the equation, we believe we are opening a window of opportunity to help enable business and benefits of trade to be more widely shared. The first of us, for us, was Uruguay. Canada came next, followed by Argentina, Brazil, and Ecuador as the latest FTAs. And also, we're currently negotiating with other countries like the EU. A recent World Bank and WTO study recognized these FTAs as having the most detailed and comprehensive gender-related provisions to date. So you can imagine how proud we are. And in that same direction, also a recent ITC study showed that FTAs with gender provisions are building blocks for larger, more integrated markets, and that they open opportunities in global trade, global value chains. And I'm sure that Pamela can add more on this issue, but also I think I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the ITC for all the work that you are doing on this field, and that is of the utmost importance for us. There is a work plan for our trade and gender chapters that are flexible and open to be modified depending on the needs that both parties agree upon. And we're convinced that these work programs provide a unique opportunity to undertake bilateral efforts to improve the conditions of women and their participation in national and international market, to develop cooperation, including capacity building skills efforts, financial inclusion, advancing women's leadership, and developing women's networks by promoting female entrepreneurship. Also, these chapters establish a bilateral committee to oversee this work, provide advice, and report on the progress. And the reality is that these are not just, paper. We have made this and we have brought this into life and have proven to be very successful in allowing access to tools and resources to help connect more and more women entrepreneurs to international trade. In the case of Canada, which is very relevant also for the panel, we have benefited from the work that Canada is doing, and we have done as part of the implementation of the trade and gender chapter, many different experiences and activities to increase the skills that we have, the analysis of our trade agreements and policies. and also examples such as programs like 2-year work programs with Canada that now is in progress for the upcoming 2 years. And finally, I'd like to mention what is the latest crown jewel, and that is the signing of the Global Trade and Gender Arrangement with Canada and New Zealand as the result of being members of something that we started precisely in APEC, the Inclusive Trade Action Group, the ETAG. And this agreement, which was signed only in August last year, promotes mutually supported trade and gender policies. And for us, it's a very strong commitment to unlock new opportunities and as part of a broader effort to improve gender equality. It also includes specific provisions on gender and trade in services, establishing, for instance, that if a participant adopts or maintains measures relating to licensing requirements and procedures, qualification requirements and procedures, or technical standards relating to authorizations for the supply of a service, it will ensure that such measures do not discriminate based on gender. So I think it's finally, it's worth noting that this is an arrangement that is open for new members to join, and we will be actively looking for a broader adherence. In particular, you know, and this is something a couple of weeks ago, I was in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and they were extremely interested in joining as part of also the reforms that are going through there. But just to mention that this is something that is a wave that I think we need to keep fostering, because it's reaching everywhere. And from here, at least, we will keep developing trade policy tools to make this happen. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. And Laura, can I jump in?
Yeah, no, I was going to just make one concluding remark, because we had all these awesome questions. I think that's, you know, food for thought for another panel. And the only thing that I wanted to close with is we need to take that package on the road and deliver it to Geneva, man. If we want to deliver what matters, we need to be advancing these rules in a multilateral setting. And we've got great leadership here. It's clear there's a lot of understanding that we need to take concrete actions. Let's take this on the road to Geneva. That's all I'd say.
I love it, Laura, and I'm sorry to jump in. I know folks have to jump off. I know Heather had to jump off and Sarah have to jump off. Really great stuff. I've gotten already like emails and texts and chat from people loving this conversation. We are continuing it next week, drilling down into some real specific things that can be done to help women engage more in international trade. I will say, and just a question for everybody, are there, you know, the ILO core labor standards are something people have talked about for decades. Are there core standards for women in trade? And should we have a parallel in a sense that we can all point to? Several of the questions came up. I'm just going to throw that out there. We don't have to answer it here, but where, you know, women's equal protection under the law, ban gross violations of rights, non-discrimination, violence and harassment in the workplace. Like, are there a set of standards that we could adopt at the WTO and elsewhere that would be, that you would have to sign up for to participate in various trade preference programs or trade agreements? I don't know if that exists.
Can I just throw something in there quickly, because I was going to mention
to jump off, so go ahead if you have to.
Yeah, just quickly that, you know, there has been an informal working group on trade and gender set up at the end of last year. And I think it's a critical group, because all of these ideas and all of these possibilities need to be fed into that process, because it is now an integral part of the WTO setting, and all the WTO members have agreed to the establishment of this IWG. So I think that this would be a perfect opportunity to discuss these ideas, to flesh them out, and to actually get them fed into a new agreement within the context of the WTO. Yeah, just my comment.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Laura, I'm so grateful to you and your team for this. Thank you to our panelists. We have a lot of questions we didn't get to. I'll forward those to all our panelists so they see them and can possibly with them try to get back to you if it's possible to do that. Thank you all very much. We hope to see you at our event next week. Take care, everybody. Be safe, wear a mask.